Well, postmodernism, I've actually tried to stop using the word because it's very hard to stop using it, but it means so many different things to so many different people that it's almost become a word which doesn't mean anything at all. I guess if to the extent that I still use it or find it inescapable, I'd say that I want to think of it not as like a style or a choice which people make, I'll write a postmodern novel or be postmodern, but as a description of sort of the general cultural circumstances which we're living under. Basically because of various political, social, economic, technological changes with global capital and electronic transmissions and all the things like that. It seems, without having to have a monolithic theory of what influences what, it seems we have a constellation of things which is very different from, say, the early mid-20th century, let alone from before. So, and postmodern is unfortunately the best word people have come up to describe or to give a label to this. Yeah, cyberculture, it's the same kind of thing. It's a very vague word which may nonetheless be inescapable. Since myself included, more people are living more of their lives and doing more things online, making connections, paying their bills and buying things, or all sorts of things, then again, it's probably an inescapable word. I'm not sure whether the word itself means much except to designate an area which we then want to think about. I'm always worried about general theories, and they make me nervous, and maybe it's just that I'm not good at doing them, but I'm always worried that when people make grand theories, it's much too much of, it's ignoring singularities, ignoring differences. Now, that's a general philosophical question. Whether it applies more or less to now as to other periods is different. But at least in my own work, I want to, if we understand the words are just sort of fairly broad designations, it's okay. If we try to put them with too much specific descriptive power, then they become confining. And in my own work, I try to start from singularities or from very particular things and look and see what they lead to rather than try to give a kind of global totalizing way. And partly, Lyotard said that the age of grand theories is over and grand narratives, and I'm not sure whether it's that or whether it's just that's kind of the way I prefer to work, and I'm suspicious of totalizing. Maybe it's because I'm postmodern that I am, but maybe it's just that you miss a lot of stuff if you go to the totalizing theory too quickly. Well, that's a complicated question. On one level, there's been a lot of rhetoric about disembodiment, and sometimes it takes very silly forms. When people, Hans Moravec has this kind of fantasy that we'll all download our brains into computers and become immortal, or when John Perry Barlow says the invention of the internet is the most important human event since the taming of fire. That seems kind of ridiculous to me. On the other hand, it's obvious that things are changing, and that one of the changes is that, again, things will be less materialized, and that we have long-distance communication. People aren't physically present. We can nonetheless have contact with. That was already true in the 19th century with the telegraph and the telephone, but it's obviously more true with new technologies. So I wouldn't deny that there's certain changes in how our bodies are going to be presenting themselves. But what I criticize, I guess, is these fantasies of disembodiment, which certain people writing about cyberculture have had. I don't believe they're possible. It's even if you take them at their word, if you're embodied in silicon instead of in carbon-based flesh, you're still embodied in something. And if somebody pulls the electric plug, I think Albert said yesterday, if somebody pulls the electric plug on the computer, then it disappears. Everything has a physical substrate. And even if you accept the idea of information rather than other ways of considering materiality, and even if you accept, which I'm not sure I really do, the idea that information is just a pattern which can be enacted in any matter indifferently, it still has to be enacted in some matter. The pattern never exists without its embodiment. And from that, I don't think it's that big a step to say that the embodiment may matter, and that even if you accept to some extent this very seductive idea that the pattern can be repeated in different embodiments, that doesn't necessarily mean that the matter in which the embodiment takes place is totally indifferent, because matter isn't completely transparent. I mean, it has a certain density and materiality. I don't think can be eliminated. So, from that point of view, I'm critical of some of the very predominant cyber fictions, which we'll talk about dematerialization this way. But that doesn't mean. Okay, two things. One is that because I don't believe it's possible, I'm not as worried about it as some theorists are. When Baudrillard or the Croakers in Canada talk about how the extermination of the body and the extermination of the real, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be exterminated because there is a physical substrate, and there always will be. So in that sense, I don't find it as terrifying. For the same reason, I don't find it as exhilarating as the people who think we're going to be immortal are. So from that point of view, I just think it's a question of then looking at different types of materializations and what they'll really entail and what changes they'll make. Okay, that's what you said is very much what I'm interested in. And in terms of what my project is, I'd say one thing is that I'm interested in questions of emotion or of affect. I mean, partly because they're generally ignored. The emphasis over the last 20, 30 years on semiotics and on ideology and on textuality has often led to ignore questions of affect, which are not necessarily reducible to linguistic, though again we can't apprehend them outside of or without language, but they're not necessarily reducible to linguistic codes. So our language is obviously coded, and any criticism I write is obviously coded, but I'm interested in trying to find out, that which is uncoded and how it relates to what's coded. Again, it's difficult because I don't want to say in some kind of silly way, we just should have our emotions instead of our rationality. I mean, that's obviously stupid. But to think about how questions of emotion and affect impact upon semiotic codes instead of just remaining in the semiotic codes and seeing, again, how their change seems to be important and seems to be largely ignored. And again, I get this partly from Deleuze and Guattari, but I don't think I'm just trying to translate their program, is what affects even discourses, and both discourses and language and images have, is often an effect of it's a pun in English, an effect of their affect, rather than just an effect of their meaning. So I don't have any romantic idea that we escape meaning or that we come to something truer or more natural, but I do think that the whole realm of affect or emotion is a very important part of how we exist and negotiate our way through culture, and that therefore that's what I want to look at it. I think you have to look at images in different ways and not take. I don't ever see that it's a flood of things which you must guard against. I mean, obviously, like many other people, I'm disturbed by certain things going on in culture and society, but I try to avoid making it some kind of thing. In the old days we had a wonderful situation, now it's all getting destroyed. I'm more interested in, again, looking at modulations and looking at multiple possibilities. In terms of images, I think, the 20th century, at least, is very much the century of cinema. I can't see what the 21st century will be. I mean, already the latter part of the 20th century was the role of cinema has been displaced by video and television, just in terms of what people do. And, of course, that's a great multiplication of the ways in which we're awash in images. I mean, we have beautiful scenery behind us right now, but for the most part, the media sphere is the nature. What we used to be nature is now the media, is the nature which surrounds us for the most part. And I don't think it makes sense to deplore that. I think, as with anything else, we have to understand that as a field of action to do what we want to do or find desirable. And film is an important modulation of images, or is an important way in the last century that images have proliferated, but it's not the only way. So I can say, as a film, I like film, and I don't think film's going to disappear any more than novels disappeared, or painting for that matter. But I think the way films do images is both becoming less traditionally cinematic and more influenced by other things, and increasingly images pass in other ways besides through cinema. And a lot of me, I do have this kind of aesthetic gratification from certain types of images, which you might associate with either classic cinema or even more, say, with modernist cinema from the 60s and 70s. And I do have a certain nostalgia for that, but I'm also very interested in different types of images. And I think all these mutations which are going on culturally, one thing artists can do is take those mutations and do more interesting things with them than would have happened otherwise. And I think that's probably happening with the video I showed in my talk yesterday and with other things. I think those kinds of things are happening. I think technology is part of human nature. Even aside, if you took it in the broadest sense, you might even say that many animals have technology, at least in some very limited sense. But if you take technological in a more narrow sense, and the way we're talking about technological innovation, it's not something that's been invented, 20 years ago or 50 years ago, but it's existed for at least 60,000 years. If you go into prehistoric records, one of the emergence of Homo sapiens, which is less than 100,000 years ago, they mark it by differences in the structure of the skulls and the bones, but also associated with sometime like 60 or 70,000 years ago, people start innovating much more, making many more variety of tools. I think technology in a human sense certainly occurs then, and it's a mistake to think technology is only the particular new technology or the particular post-Newtonian science type of technology we have. I think technology has always been what human beings are made of, or what we make of ourselves and what we ourselves are made of. So in that sense, it's not a particular, there are particular different types of technology, but technology, I think, is a basic if it makes any sense to talk about an essence of what human beings are, it's having a culture and a technology, and I don't think you can separate the two. Insofar as humans have language and culture, they also have technology, and that's part of how we live in the world and have since we evolved to where we are now.
Thank you very